It's the most wonderful time of the year. At least it should be. This is the Black Man with the Gun Show podcast. And this week, as we prepare for the holidays, a rant like you've never heard, in my honest opinion, and 5 firearms that everybody should own.
BlackManWithAGun.com, Kenn Blanchard's Pro-Gun Podcast.
Hey, you know how everybody's like decorating their house and getting their house all spruced up with lights and stuff, and holly and garland, all that good stuff. And there's like kids coming over, and there's people cooking special dinners, and everybody's getting ready for the festivities, and it's all happiness and joy. Not in my house. I ain't feeling it this year. So pray for a brother, will you? What's up, good people? I want to give you 5 types of firearms that everybody should own. The first is that first gun. You know, that firearm that you bought because you thought you had to buy something. You find out later on that that gun is boring. That gun does not fit you. That gun is not for what you bought it for. Everybody has that first gun. If you bought a gun for self-defense and then you bought a 22, you thought, oh, darn. But that's okay. The 22 is good to practice with. Practice your marksmanship. It's your first gun. Or maybe you bought that shotgun because you thought that the hordes were coming. The zombies were coming. But you bought the wrong shotgun. You bought a trap or skeet shotgun, which is like 30 inches long, the barrel by itself. And you don't know anything about close quarter battles. So navigating through your house is like a bull in the china shop. Or you bought that little teeny bullpup shotgun. And you don't actually know how to use that effectively. But you got one. Not dogging you for that. Or whatever you bought. You bought it used, you bought it from somebody, and it's your first gun. It's okay. We all start somewhere. You should buy a revolver. Now, I know you think they're old-timey, but revolvers have been around for a long time, and there's a reason for it. Anything that's been around a long time, you might want to check out. Don't poo-poo experience. Don't poo-poo something that's tried and true for the new. Because new is not always good. Not for you. Now, as you progress, you will find out that maybe you're a really, really good revolver shooter. And the only way you'll know that is if you get taught by somebody who knows what they're doing with a revolver. But you should own one. Or 2. Next, the semi-automatic pistol, which everybody buys because that's the hot thing right now. There's single action only. There's double action. And they have all kind of accoutrements. You can put on flashlights and lasers and red dot scopes and threaded barrels for suppressors. Oh man, there's so much stuff that you can put on there and make it yours. It's just fun. It's like a Lego building set. But you might have bought the wrong one. So make sure you do some investigation. You try out a couple because the caliber matters too. 380, 9mm, 40, 45, 50. Caliber matters. Also, the bullet itself matters. You could have a target load, or a self-defense load, or a competition load, or you could reload on your own. The types of stuff are endless because the ammunition can change the way you shoot. And semi-automatics are dependent upon reliable ammunition to function, unlike revolvers. If you are in an emergency situation and you pull the trigger on a revolver and you get a click instead of a bang, you just pull the trigger again. Odds are in your favor that you will get a bang. If you have a semi-automatic, a pistol, and you get a click instead of a bang, then you must go into an immediate action drill. You must check for a malfunction. You must make sure that you can cycle your pistol. And if you hadn't had good training, you will freeze and do nothing, which can cost you something, sometimes your life. But pistols are awesome. Semi-automatic guns, awesome. You must be trained correctly so that you can operate this thing in the dark, on your knees, in the bed, while you're sneezing, in the shower, in the rain, etc. You might also want to own a carbine. Carbine looks like a rifle, but it's shorter and it uses the same caliber ammunition as you have on your semi-automatic pistol. Now, what makes that thing great is you can use the same ammo for two different firearms. And when you're navigating in your house, you have a smaller weapon to use. And you might enjoy shooting carbine at the range. Since the caliber is the same as a pistol, you might be able to get more range time if you shoot on indoor ranges. Which brings me to the next one, a rifle. Just like the shotgun, sometimes you can't shoot that at indoor ranges. And if you live in an urban environment, in a city, the ranges are not that fair. They don't want you to beat up their equipment because they want to make money off the next guy. So they might have a long gun range, they might not. So you will not be shooting a lot of rounds through that rifle that you bought because they're going like hotcakes. Got to get me an AR. There's 100 of them out there. Yeah. And they'll be collecting dust. But if you have one, if you built one, if you understand how they run, good stuff. But you must get, you guessed it, training. So what have we talked about? Your first gun, which could be anything, that you should probably own a revolver or one or two. A pistol, one or two. A carbine and a rifle. And you need training for every system that you run. And which everything you run, you'll also have other stuff that comes with it. There'll be holsters, there'll be cases, there'll be ammunition, there'll be loaders and cleaning kits, and there's a ton of stuff that goes with each type of firearm that I mentioned. The F in firearms stands for fun. But you must understand your limitations. You must learn the operation of whatever system that you're running. Or you're at a disadvantage. You're cheating yourself. Back in the day, we used to buy these magazines, they're like paper things that you read in a magazine store, and they would push certain magazines because our heroes had them. They won them in a competition, or this was the newest thing out and everybody had bought one, or they thought that the law enforcement agency, the FBI, CIA, the Secret Service, they got these right now. State police are now using these. I got to get me one of those. Now we got the internet, people, so, whatever the Hickox got, I guess, must be in. Shout out to you, John. Now, as we close out for this year, I know you guys are waiting for SHOT Show and the National Rifle Association annual meeting to pop back up and all the events that we used to go to and congregate. We might have to wait just one more year until folks get inoculated from the disease and we kind of knock it down. I was looking back at history, and plagues and this sort of thing comes around every few hundred years. And I guess it's just our turn again. And they had the same thing happen with the bubonic plague and the Black Death and quite a few other things where folks got sick of being on lockdown and they had parties and stuff. And then they all died. Yeah. I'm realizing some stuff. There's some common themes if you watch and listen to history, if you read history, if you study. We haven't changed much. Folks who live in the nation's capital, live in D.C., Maryland, Virginia, most of us work for the U.S. government. So we're all feds, and we're prohibited from running for office and doing a whole bunch of stuff. So all our news is kind of skewed to national, what's going on. And we see the folks that you may esteem and think so-and-so is great in office, and he or she is not. They will let you down. Have you ever come to Washington, D.C. to meet your national representative, your congressman, your senator, or whatever, most likely, I'd almost bet that you met their aide. You didn't meet them in person. They didn't have the cojones, the wherewithal, the sense to make an appointment to be with you. They skipped out, couldn't care less. You saw their aide, you saw their fancy office, and you didn't get a chance to talk to them at all, because that's the kind of people we have here in Washington, D.C. If you do anything political, have you ever testified in front of a state legislator? It'd be an important bill, something that you really, really care about. You ever watch their body language and watch them if they're listening to you at all? They could care less. They just know that you have the mic and they have to sit there. But they soon excuse themselves and they walk away, and it's horrible. It's worse here in D.C. We got a guy here in Maryland. He's been in office since 1975. Yeah. Don't know what he's done for anybody in my state, but yet he's still there. So when folks tell me, oh man, I'm coming to Washington and I'm going to join this group and we're going to talk to our senators and our congressmen, I'm like, good luck. Yeah. While you're at it, go to an amusement park, visit a museum, make this place really worth your trip. Because 9 out of 10 politicians in this area, our federal government, are not worth your vote. They've been there too long. They're part of the system. And I mean everybody. But I'm just jaded because I live here. I know. And while I'm talking about the city, you know, something I learned just recently, if you live in a metropolitan area, if you live in a city, you're more likely to catch COVID, corona, some deadly disease, because of the number of people that are around you. Now, if you live in a state that's spread out, y'all have rural areas, there's like a lot of air and breathable people. I mean, there's like space between you. Then you might think that all this corona stuff is over the top. It's not. It's just that you are blessed not to be around a whole bunch of people. There's some social contracts that you have to do when you become a part of civilization, that you become a part of the city structure. And we forget. Yeah, we forget. But you won't forget when those services are not available. We are not that far from where there won't be any food in the grocery store, where the police won't come when you call 911, where you will be on your own. Now, if you live outside of a big city, you already are kind of prepared for that. You're used to cooking and making your own stuff and heating your house. You're on the grid, but you're not on it like the folks who live in apartment buildings. You're not on the grid like the folks who depend on Safeway and Giant and Lidl or Lidl, whatever that thing is, or Wegmans or a grocery store to have your favorite whatever. I'm just saying, in 2021, think about being more self-reliant. Think about getting away, if you can, from so many people. I know we get back to that thing about city life for me, but the world is changing. Being on top of people, not a good thing. Just saying. And as this year closes, I want to thank all my patrons, those of you who have supported this podcast. What you're going to do actually is you're going to support a new movement. Well, not a new movement, but a new activity I'm going to do in 2021. I'm working on it right now, where I'm going to be doing some video on television. I'm trying to put together a show, and it's going to help the Second Amendment. It's going to be based on helping new shooters, new people in the movement. And thank you for doing that. Thank you for being so persistent and loving and believing in your friend and your brother from another mother. Because I know I'm different. I'm not that rabid dude. I'm not that Samuel Jackson character. I'm not polarizing. I believe in humanity. I believe in you. And thank you for believing in me. Thank you for being a part of patreon.com/blackmanwithagun. The following is for mature audiences only. Parental guidance suggested. I wish all of you a very Merry Christmas, a Happy New Year, a prosperous New Year. 2021 has to be better than 2020. But before we go into the future, before we unwrap all our gifts, before we celebrate the end of another year, I want to do something that I haven't done in a while, but I used to do more often. And that was to share a little history. History is important because it gives us a reference. How do you know where you're going if you don't know where you've been? And also, if you are doing the same mistakes as the past, then you will make them again if you don't know any better. Having lived almost 60 years on this earth and being involved in the Second Amendment, I've learned a lot. I have a vast experience. I've traveled through 13 different countries. I've lived in a couple. I've been a foreigner. I've been that guy, the expat. I've been the one that actually can tell the difference between what it feels like not to be here. So if you will indulge me, I want to take you back and let you see through my eyes what I see now. I want to start with segregation, which was happening when I was a kid. Segregation is the practice of requiring separate housing, education, and other services for people of color. Segregation was made law several times in the 18th and 19th century here in America, as people believed that black and white people were incapable of coexisting. In the lead up to the liberation of slaves under the 13th Amendment, abolitionists argued about what the fate of slaves would be once they were freed. One group argued for colonization, either returning the slaves to Africa or creating their own homeland. In 1862, President Abraham Lincoln recognized the ex-slave countries of Haiti and Liberia, hoping to open channels for colonization, with Congress allocating $600,000 to help. While the colonization plan did not work, the country instead set forth on a path of legally mandating segregation. We created something called the Black Codes and Jim Crow. The first steps toward officially segregating this country came in the form of Black Codes. They were laws passed throughout the South, starting around 1865 officially, that dictated most aspects of black people's lives, included where they could work and live. Most importantly, in this context, who can own guns and who cannot. The codes also ensured black people's availability for cheap labor after slavery was abolished. Stay with me. Don't leave me yet. I am going somewhere with this. Segregation became official policy, enforced by a series of Southern laws. Through these Jim Crow laws, named after a derogatory term for black people, legislators segregated everything from schools to residential areas to public parks to theaters to pools to cemeteries, asylums, jails, and even homes. There were separate waiting rooms for whites and blacks in professional offices, and in 1915, Oklahoma became the first state to even segregate public phone booths. Colleges were segregated, and separate black institutions like Howard University in Washington, D.C. and Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee were created to compensate. Virginia's Hampton Institute was established in 1869 as a school for black youth, but with white instructors teaching skills to regulate blacks in service positions to whites. Today they're called historically black colleges, and it's esteemed. But back then, it was the only place black people could go to college. In 1875, the outgoing Republican-controlled House and Senate, which had black people in it, black people were Republican at this point. They passed the Civil Rights Bill outlawing discrimination in schools, churches, and public transportation, but the bill was barely enforced and was overturned by the Supreme Court in 1883. In 1896, the Supreme Court ruled in a case called Plessy versus Ferguson that segregation was constitutional. The ruling established the idea of separate but equal. The case involved a mixed-race man who was forced to sit in a black designated area on a train under Louisiana's Separate Car Act. But wait, there's more. You see, my maternal and paternal grandparents were born now in this area, in this era. And as part of the segregation movement, some cities instituted zoning laws that prohibited black families from moving into white-dominant blocks. In 1917, as part of the Buchanan versus Worley, the Supreme Court found such zoning to be unconstitutional because it interfered with property rights of owners. Using loopholes in that ruling in 1920s, Herbert Hoover, who was the Secretary of Commerce, created a federal zoning committee to persuade local boards to pass rules preventing lower-income families from moving into middle-income neighborhoods, an effort that targeted black families. Richmond, Virginia, decreed that people were barred from residency on any block where they could not legally marry the majority of the residents. This invoked Virginia's anti-mixed race marriage law and was not technically in violation of the Supreme Court decision. During the Great Migration, and that's that period between 1916 and 1970, 6 million African Americans left the South. Huge numbers moved northeast and reported discrimination and segregation similar to what they had experienced in the South. This migration is also where we get our blues music from. The blues left the plantations, the blues left the sharecroppers. They went to Detroit and to Chicago and to New York City. They got sophisticated and had jazz. As late as the 1940s, it was still possible to find a, quote, whites-only sign on businesses in the North. Segregation in neighborhoods still existed in schools. And even after World War II, black activists reported hostile reactions when blacks attempted to move into white neighborhoods. If you look at gun history, there is a big story about a doctor by the name of Ossian Sweet that you might want to check out. And I've talked about him a few times on past episodes of this podcast. The Public Works Administration, efforts to build housing for people displaced during the Great Depression, focused on homes for white families and white communities. Only a small portion of houses was built for black families, and those were limited to segregated black communities. And some cities, previously integrated communities, were torn down by the Public Works Administration and replaced by the projects. The reason given for the policy was that black families would bring down property values. Now, these are only the highlights because during this time, there were still wars. There were still people going into the military. There were still gun laws being changed and done from the black codes. There were tons of things that were happening in between this. Starting in the 1930s, the Federal Home Loan Bank Board and the Homeowners Loan Corporation conspired to create maps with marked areas considered bad risk for mortgages in a practice known as redlining. The areas marked in red as hazardous typically outlined black neighborhoods. This kind of mapping concentrated poverty as, quote, mostly black residents in redlined neighborhoods, and they had no access or only very expensive access to loans. This practice did not begin to end until the 1970s. But wait, there's more. We can back up a couple of decades, and I guarantee you, your parents were probably born in the areas that I just mentioned. In 1948, the Supreme Court ruled that a black family had the right to move into their newly purchased home in a quiet neighborhood in St. Louis, despite a covenant dating back to 1911 that precluded the use of the property in the area by, quote, any person not of the Caucasian race, end quote. In Shelley v. Kramer, attorneys from the NAACP, we were called colored people back at the time, and at the time of my birth certificate, mine said colored. But let me continue. This was led by Thurgood Marshall, and he argued that allowing such white-only real estate covenants were not only morally wrong, but strategically misguided in a time when the country was trying to promote a unified anti-Soviet agenda under President Harry Truman. Civil rights activists saw the landmark case as an example of how to start to undo trappings of segregation at the federal level. But while the Supreme Court ruled that white-only covenants were not enforceable, the real estate playing field was hardly leveled. The Housing Act of 1949 was proposed by Truman to solve a housing shortage caused by soldiers returning from World War II. The act subsidized housing for whites only, even stipulating that black families could not purchase the houses, even on resale. The program effectively resulted in the government funding white flight from cities. Segregation in public schools for kids was struck down by the Supreme Court as unconstitutional in 1954 with Brown v. Board of Education. Did you know that the case was originally filed in Topeka, Kansas after 7-year-old Linda Brown was rejected from an all-white school there? A follow-up opinion handed decision-making to local courts, which often happens even with our gun stuff, and it allowed some districts to defy school desegregation. This led to a showdown in Little Rock, Arkansas in 1957 when President Dwight D. Eisenhower deployed federal troops to ensure 9 black students entered high school after Arkansas Governor Orval Faubus had called in the National Guard to block them. When Rosa Parks was arrested in 1955 after refusing to give up her bus seat to a white man in Montgomery, Alabama, the civil rights movement began like a gangster. That part you understand. That part you know. You know about the efforts of organizers like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the resulting protests and the Civil Rights Act that was signed in 1964. But the civil rights era didn't change much because segregation was still happening. Around this time, there was a guy by the name of George Corley Wallace Jr. He was an American politician who served as the 45th governor of Alabama. He was in that spot for 4 terms. He's best remembered for his staunch segregationist and populist views. During his tenure, he prompted low-grade industrial development, low taxes, and trade schools. He was actually one of the founders of community college. He sought the United States presidency as a Democrat 3 times, and once as an American Independent Party candidate, unsuccessfully each time. Wallace opposed desegregation and supported the policies of Jim Crow during the Civil Rights Movement, declaring in his 1963 inaugural address that he stood for segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever. This was the area that I was born. The news was different. Playing outside was different. Living in this atmosphere was different. When school started busing in the 70s, I was a part of that. I watched the adults try their best to ensure that the kids had a better future than they did, that racism would disappear, that one day we would care more about the content of a character than the color of their skin, that one day little black children and little white children can be together. And for a time, it seems as if that was working. My favorite show was Star Trek at the time. It was in its first running, and it was really corny, but it was science fiction. And one of the things that they did on there a lot was talk about unity of race and color and ideals. And it seems like a good thing. The hippies were around back then also, talking about love and peace. And there was a war going on, a war that we didn't start, a war that we were a part of, a war that had casualties. There was a lot of unrest. I remember when King was killed. I remember when the riots hit Washington, D.C. I remember my parents trying their best to make it so that it wasn't the same for me as it was for them. We still had segregated churches. We still had segregated communities for the most part. And as I grew up and got into the gun movement, I was determined to be something my parents would be proud of. I didn't know that the world had not advanced that far. People still had fear of firearms. There was still a culture of fear. Fear sells. Fear keeps people where they want to go. Large organizations use fear of loss to keep people down. They promote it. They say, well, if you don't buy this stuff now, the other guys are going to get it and there's going to be a war. And for a time, that had all passed away. I thought I was in the last generation of racism in the United States. I was quite sure of it. I joined the Marines as a challenge because my parents and my relatives said, don't go there. They were the last military outfit to integrate, to desegregate. A lot of racists are still in there. Join the Army if you're going to be in the military. No. This was the 80s, 1980 to be exact. All my drill instructors and most of the officers and senior enlisted were all Nam and Korean vets. They had been through these same parts of the world, the same segregation, the same racism, the same institutionalized stuff that we talk about, that I just spoke about. They were in this era, and they were dealing with these new people like me who are wide-eyed and ready for change. I confronted real racists, Klans members, bikers, white nationalists on a daily basis. In the Marine Corps, in the street. We had Klan literature placed on the windshields of cars in our high school parking lot in Maryland. It was still trying to be there, but we're going to fight it because we were a different generation. Gun laws and housing and the criminal justice system has all been biased by our history. Our country is founded on racist principles, but it's the best country in the world. I am proud to be an American citizen. I am proud to be an American son. But I'm not proud of the crap that I see in social media, the crap that adults say and promulgate. I am saddened by the division, by the divisiveness, by the belief that the current president is right on anything. Our political system is busted. We haven't had people of integrity for a long time. We keep choosing between two devils, and we pick a side as if it's a football team. And we like talking smack about our side, but your side is busted. Your side is manipulative. Your side has done great wrong. You Democrats, oh, you liberals, oh, you Republicans, whoever you call is wrong. If you take a side, you're wrong. And right now, being extreme is in. Somebody that I thought was okay said that the only thing in the middle of the road is roadkill and a yellow line. Only cowards are in the middle. Being a centrist, I was told today, is a negative. I can only agree with that if you say that being neither hot nor cold is wrong. That's biblical. Being lukewarm is horrible. That's a bad thing. But you can be hot or cold and still be wrong. It just depends on the issue. And when it deals with humans, it's often not left or right, black nor white, just human. Whatever happened to common sense and decency? Oh, I know it's still there. We just don't think it's nice anymore. It's not fun. It's not the right thing to do. Many years ago, when I started off with the black man with a gun, it was cute to me, paying homage to Richard Williams, who wrote Negroes with Guns. I was going to use the name just for a few years, get this book out, and then let it go because there'd be plenty of other people of color training and teaching firearms. It took a little longer than I thought, but you're here now. Quite a few. I learned through my struggles that it was more important to evangelize freedom, to educate people on their rights, than to take a side. So I dropped the black thing and became a helper to whoever didn't know about the rights that they had or didn't know about the firearms that they could buy or own or use or get for whatever reason they wanted. I helped start the Pink Pistols, the gay and lesbian gun club. Yeah, I was there. At least locally, I was there. And I'm not even comfortable in that crowd. But people are people, right? And then even later, online, I helped start the Latin American Gun Owners Association. There's a Facebook page for it. I'm not even Hispanic nor Latino, but right is right and wrong is wrong. But though I don't care much for flying up in a rocket ship or beaming into space, the one part of science fiction that I wish was science fact was the fact that a white person and a black person and a green person and a yellow person can be in the same room together and not have to be at odds with each other because of political, social, economic, whatever reasons. You do you, I'll do me. But today I see us going backwards. We're segregating by design. We're allowing social media and all of the spies and robots and all the stuff on social media to push stuff to make us join one side or the other. For nationalism, for blackness, is all crap. And if you can't see how divisive you have been personally, you need a checkup from the neck up. 2020 has done a monster of a deal on so many people, but also we've done a monster on ourselves. We've screwed up some relationships that we could have fostered and mended fences and built bridges. Segregation. Yeah. Just like the gun community, we circle the wagons, point inside and fire. Right now we have the largest number of pro-gun people than we ever had. They're all over social media. There is nothing to bind us together. There is nothing to foster relationships so that we may learn from each other, so we may become a stronger party, so that we may get things done. Just divisiveness and snarkiness and smart-ass remarks. Because I'm always right. Yeah, you and your mama. What has changed since 1962? You tell me.
Being an armed citizen means having a gun with you all the time. Carrying a firearm every day requires a holster that is both concealable and comfortable. Whether you choose our Super Tuck Deluxe or Mini Tuck, you'll have the confidence that comes from being discreetly and comfortably armed, prepared to face unforeseen dangers. Crossbreed holsters are handmade in the USA, come with a lifetime warranty, and a 2-week try-it-free guarantee. Order your holster today at crossbreedholsters.com.
For most of us, it's a time of reflection. It's a time to think about the things that we might have gotten or might have done, places we might go next year, and folks that we have in our lives. I'm thankful that I have just a few friends still in this life. I'm thankful for you who listen and download the Black Man with a Gun show. I'm thankful for those who know me, know my heart, know that I am trying with every last breath to make a difference. Yeah, sometimes I mess up. I say the wrong thing. I'm silent maybe when I should be loud. But I'm wishing truly that you and your family prosper, that you and your family are healthy, that we get through this thing together, that during this time of quiet time you consider the less fortunate, you consider your neighbor, you consider changing maybe to help somebody else. This is a season of giving, and the best gift you can give is yourself. Just in case nobody else has told you this today, I love you, and there's not a damn thing you can do about it. Until next year, shalom, baby.
If you don't change direction, you may end up where you're heading. BlackManWithAGun.com